This video is brought to you by Squarespace, but more on them on the later part of this video. Welcome back to Jay's Iyagi. This is my journey, my passion, my experience with the Paradigm 40B bookshelf speakers. This is how I start my day, by caressing the acoustic lens of the 40B. Now this is the speaker that we're talking about today, and we will definitely talk about this acoustic properties of this acoustic lens on the Twitter as well. But they do come with a separate grill, so this is like double protection in that regard. Before we get to that, let's talk about Paradigm as a company, because they're actually local here in Canada. I've actually been to their facility a few times, and every single time I'm there, I'm just amazed. They have a world-class facility there. I'm not just saying that, they actually have stuff to back it up. For example, they have an anechoic chamber. So what that means is that they have big foam sticking out. Now this is a picture at the NRC measuring the Model 5s, but basically the same thing. They have the exact same facility. Now this means that they have all the tools necessary from the engineering perspective to take accurate measurements to the dot. So that's really impressive. Now, for those of you that don't care about measurements or, for whatever reason, blind test. They do blind test. They have a room for blind testing and actually listening to the speakers to see what they prefer and the outcome of the design and the sound signature of these speakers. So exceptional, stages of engineering and R&D that goes into their speakers. And you can really tell. I mean, this speaker, it's heavy. It's a heavy speaker. I know that the knock test is not, doesn't tell you much, but this cabinet is sturdy. It is rock solid. In fact, one of the interviews that I've seen of the CEO talks about how they do drop test on these. I wouldn't dare try that, but they do drop test on these speakers. Like they kick it off the ledge or something to see if it survives. That's insane, man. So everything is done in Canada. These drivers, this acoustic lens, all the design elements just speak volume. And it's not that expensive. It's about 2,600 Canadian dollars, which translates to, I don't know, in US dollars. That will be about 2,020 US dollars. And for that kind of money, honestly, this speaker looks gorgeous. I mean, the cabinet, let's take a moment to appreciate the build quality and the finish of this cabinet. It just looks gorgeous. And it's not like a bling bling, like look at me kind of speaker. It's just classically elegant. And I have the walnut finish here, which I think is absolutely gorgeous. But they have other finishes as well. Now let's talk about the acoustic lens here for a minute, because I mean, aside from the much appreciated waveguide that looks like, Buchard, right? They made a name for themselves with that waveguide, but they have similar, not exactly the same, but similar waveguide going on here for the dispersion of the high frequency tweeter. And then we have the midwoofer with this acoustic lens. And this acoustic lens is to allow for phase coherency, much similar to how a phase plug works, but as Paradigm explains it, into a much higher degree of efficiency. It does it much better than a phase plug. And you can see it on the tweeter as well. Some people miss this, but they actually have that acoustic lens on the tweeter as well. And it's not just gorgeous. This structure, this pattern here is not just there for show to make it look gorgeous. It just happens to be gorgeous, but it functions well as well. So double win. And they actually sent me this graph of a before and after of the acoustic lens, because I did try to take this lens out of curiosity to see what it would sound like and what the effects would be. But I stopped because I didn't want to damage the speakers, first of all. And second of all, why would you do that? Right? I can evidently hear what it's doing when I actually listen to these speakers. It's not like magic or you need to have golden ears to hear it. It's just like when you hear a dual concentric design, it's just phase coherent, meaning what it actually means is that the imaging, the center imaging is dead center, is sharp. You hear every little detail in the music. Like you can hear where the singers are, where the instruments are placed within the music very, very easily. and it's never smeared or crowded. And that is what the speaker is about. This is what the speaker is really, really good at. So that's all good, but how does the rest of the sound quality sound like? How does these speakers sound like from my listening position? And how does it compare to other speakers in this price category? And we'll talk about that, but before that, I have to introduce you to the sponsor of this video, and that is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to build your online presence and run your business. I used to run and manage 3 websites for 3 different businesses, one of them being a hi-fi store, and guess what? They all used Squarespace. I asked those businesses what they liked about Squarespace, and it mainly came down to 3 main points. Number 1, they really like the custom templates. Squarespace has one of the most diverse custom templates to fit any business model. This means less money and money spent on creating a website from scratch. Number 2, they said it was easy to use. Squarespace is intuitive and easy to use for someone with little to no experience building a website and managing it. Number 3, they said it makes selling easy. These days, it's all about e-commerce and standing out, and Squarespace makes selling online easy for both the customer and the business owner with email campaigns, SEO tools, and analytics. So if you're interested, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready, go to squarespace.com/jiyagi to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So from my listening position, these speakers are pretty darn good. They're pretty neutral, but they do have some characteristic to them to make it sound, not so boring. At least in my room, in my experience, right? So when it comes to bass is like a traditional bookshelf speaker. When I first heard these speakers, I have to confess that I was not very impressed. I was like, another bookshelf speaker. Sounds like another normal bookshelf neutral speaker. But these do things that really no other speakers have done in my listening room. And that is basically the imaging and sound staging. And we'll talk about that because that's the highlight of this speaker. But before that, let's talk about its weaknesses and some of the stuff that I liked and disliked in terms of its frequency presentation. So bass, like I said, like a traditional bookshelf speaker, right? So it doesn't have anything really going on below like 60 hertz, 50 hertz. So sub-bass region, there's really not much going on. And you can really hear that with a track like this, Limit to Your Love by James Blake. This track has 2 distinctive sub-bass notes. And you hear the upper one a little bit, but the lower one, it's gone. It's a note, but it's not, you can't really hear it, you can't really feel the low frequency rumble. That's okay, but you can add a subwoofer. But when it comes to the mid-bass punch, these are pretty darn tight. Like the bass is very tight, it's like a piston. And it hits you in the chest, but it's not overly done to where it feels like the mid-bass punch and the mid-bass region is taking over. I've seen that with some speakers in the past. Now, the mid-range does seem a little bit warm, and does have a slight bit of warmth to it. It's not like overly warm again, it's just a slight bit of warmth in the mid-range. But it's interesting because once you get to the upper mid-range, it does come a bit forward. It's not too much again, but just a slight bit. And that gives you a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of edge. Dialogue, it seems more clear, everything is more distinct, more edged out. But that does also lend itself to, ear fatigue. Because I'm used to like the Sonos Faber Electamator 3 sound, right? And that is a smooth speaker. It doesn't have that edge. These do. And these give you a sense like you're hearing everything. So initially, when I was listening to these speakers, I've had them for about a month. Initially, I was a little bit overwhelmed of hearing everything. But over time, I did get used to it and I enjoyed it for longer periods of listening sessions. But I did get ear fatigue in the beginning. Now, the thing is this though, these speakers are not ear fatiguing because it's bright, which is interesting, right? It's not like it's bright for me, like Focals, some Focals, or some Magical speakers do. It's not bright. I would say that it's just the fact that you're hearing everything so well defined around you, surrounding you, that you're kind of overwhelmed with all the information. That's kind of the ear fatigue I'm getting. It's kind of interesting. I've never gotten ear fatigue that way with speakers majority of the time. It's either because it's bright or it's because it's sharp or something like that. These speakers are none of those, which is interesting. When it comes to the high frequency, I do feel like there needs to be a little bit more air, and you do get more airy presentation once you pull them out of the room. But you do need to pull them out of the room to really get that airy presentation and extended presentation. But again, there's no really complaints here because the high frequency is pretty neutral. It's not rolled off nor is it bright. It's pretty neutral. to where, like I said, it's not bright, but it's just on the edge. It's just on the fine edge. And if anything, I would call these speakers detailed, not necessarily bright. And talking about imaging and sound staging with some of the tracks that I played, it's fantastic. Normal tracks that I usually play sound fantastic, dead center voice, you hear everything again in the staging. But when you play a certain tracks, I should say, that has this spatial cues. So one example is this track that was introduced to me by Yura, my friend. It's called The Look by Metronomy. And this track is interesting because midway through you get this little sound on the left side, the left channel that goes ding 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 or something like that. You get the point. That was terrible, but you get that little thing going on the left. I'm not sure exactly what that is. If someone can let me know in the comment section, that'd be wonderful. But that little pleasant sound on the left channel on normal speakers like CSS Audio, Buchard speakers, virtually every bookshelf speaker that has come in here, I've tried it with this track. And on the left side of the speakers, you hear it. And sometimes it's more forward to the left on wider sound staging, deeper sound staging speakers like the Buchard, or it's onto the side of the speakers on speakers that's more narrow. But these speakers, these paradigms, give that sound to you onto my left, my listening position, like here. I hear it here, right by where my turntable is. And it's so distinct to where I can literally pinpoint it and say it's about 30-40 centimeters away from me or something like that, right? It feels like I cannot just grab it. And I know this is drastic and it kind of cliche, but you know that saying where you're like, oh, I'm hearing things new for the first time? It's not exactly that, but it feels like I'm hearing things that I've never heard before for the first time in terms of imaging and sound staging. Because I'm hearing things to my left, to my right, behind my head, behind my listening position, and it's kind of a freaky experience. And it almost feels like you have a rear channel, like a home theater, right? Rear channels that's kind of like a 3D holographic sound, but not in a sense like a tube amplifier would, where it's just like atmospheric and surrounding you. That's what tube amplifiers do and horn speakers do. These speakers don't do that in a way a horn speaker does. It's something that I've never really experienced before in a bookshelf speaker. And honestly speaking, when I first saw these speakers and heard these speakers, I thought, another traditional bookshelf speaker, that's pretty neutral. Nothing special about them. And that's the first thing I would have thought as well if I walked into a store, for example, and then listened to them. I would have given it maybe 2 minutes and moved on to the next speakers. But these speakers, once you play around with them in your room and really set them up and hear them and appreciate them, the more you hear them, the more tracks you go through, you begin to realize that they image and sound stage in a different way than other traditional speakers. And that is the strength, and that is the interesting thing about these speakers. And it's not like the tone is totally broken or is trying to be an omnidirectional speaker, but it does things in such a way that you're like, are these omnidirectional? Are these like holographic spatial audio thing going on? And it has those effects with these speakers on certain tracks. Not every track, on tracks that has those information, is able to portray it. And I believe that this speaker is able to do that because of that PPA lens that's allowing for phase coherency and allowing the sound to actually happen without any phase cancellation going on. So it's really effective in a way, like it's able to let you hear everything in the sound staging and imaging and really pinpoint and almost draw out and really measure out, actually like almost reach out and grab it. Not in the center, but like onto the side as well. It's quite amazing that way. So let's talk about some of the gear matching, because it matters with these speakers. It does. So with a certain type of gear, it may sound a little bit too bright. With certain type of gear, it may sound just right. Now, because these speakers are inherently on the fine balance of things, if you pair it up with the wrong amplifier, it can get bright and unpleasant. So personally for me, I found that the Stark Audio, the new Fiera that's coming up for review, was too bright for my personal liking with these speakers. However, it made the speakers more V-shaped, meaning you also gained more bass. So if you're in for that V-shaped sound where the bass is elevated and the high frequency is elevated just a little bit, then the Stark Audio is the right option for you. But personally for me, it wasn't it. And then I paired it up with the Thallo from Denafrips. As you guys know, this is one of my favorite amplifier because it's neutral, at least to me, and it tells me things about the speaker's sound signature right away, with majority of the speakers being really well paired synergistically with this amplifier. And had no problem driving the Paradigms as well, and it sounded pretty darn good and just fine balance for me in terms of brightness level, in terms of presence, in terms of bass authority. I think this is the one that I would recommend personally from my experience. Now, I also tried it with the NAD M10 version 2. Now, if you want something just without a preamplifier, without any of that fuzz, and all-in-one system, this is the one that I would pair with the Paradigm. Because the overall sound signature of the NAD M10 really plays well with the Paradigms. I mean, even the original, the version 1 M10, I believe will be fantastic with the Paradigms if you can pick it up in the used market. It's punchy, dynamic, everything I explained about the speaker's strength plays into effect, and I found it pretty neutral without being bright and overly fatiguing to my ears. Now, finally, I tried a tube amplifier because this speaker is relatively efficient. They're 89 dB and a quick response and about 92 dB in in-room response. So they're pretty efficient, sensitive speakers, so I decided to pair it up with the line magnetic amplifier, integrated amplifier that I have here, the 805 version. And this sounded really good, but it did sacrifice some of that nature of these speakers. It did get a little bit tad bright for me because it was so airy at the same time. So I wouldn't say it's a great match, but especially if you're someone that is into tube amplifiers, I would look for something like the Deckware instead, which will give you a more smooth response with these speakers. And lastly, I do want to emphasize this, but these speakers do well and you get more bass if you do put them towards the wall behind it. However, I wouldn't sacrifice, because a trade-off of having a little bit more bass to where you are not really getting the effect of the speaker's fullest potential of imaging and all those nuances that the speaker is really good at. Just, at least for me, it's not an equal trade-off. So for me, I would rather pull these speakers out of the room and add a subwoofer if I really want a full range experience. So that's personal take and something that I want to emphasize for this review for you guys to take away. And so that's pretty much it for this video. If you want to stick around for the Q&A section, then you can. But thank you for coming and listening to my experience with the Paradigm speakers, much appreciated. Please do click that like button if this video was helpful to you. It does help me out and it does help this channel out tremendously without costing you anything. And I'll see you guys on the next one. So before I post videos, I usually go and ask people in the community page for any questions that you want answered in the video. So I'll link to that link in the description below for you to consider asking questions before the review so I can answer them in the video. So these are the questions that I picked because I thought it was good questions. So first question was by Dr. Britain. I just auditioned these yesterday and was pleasantly surprised. Bass was controlled, if not especially deep, but they have very wide soundstage. However, I thought the soundstage might be at the expense of some upper mid control. Bear in mind, I was comparing them to the PSB Synchrony B100, which I really liked and I didn't think they sounded grand cheaper. Your thought will be interesting to hear. So not really much of a question, but it's kind of interesting to see how your listening experience kind of aligns mostly with another person. And certainly Dr. Britain right here, I think I agree with most of your assessment or what you heard at the store, I'm assuming. And I would say that I don't think it's necessarily at the expense of upper mid control or upper mid-range control. I think the upper mid-range is well controlled, but again, depending on the pairing of the amplifier, you may find it like it's a little bit too bright or too gritty, meaning like there's too much edge going on, and you know, you can get ear fatigued. So that way, depending on the pairing, I would say that what you heard can be very true, and I agree. Now when it comes to the Synchrony B100 in comparison, I don't really have an experience with that speaker particularly, so I can't speak too much for it. But certainly, you know, when you're talking about a $1,000 speaker versus a $2,000 speaker, really it comes down to preference, and at the same time it comes down to synergistic match with the amplifier as well. A $1,000 amplifier with a amplifier that matches it very well will outperform a $2,000 speaker that has a poor matching synergy with an amplifier. It's just the way it is. Synergy is a big part of it. Moving on, Brian. I would love to see how they compare to the KEF R3. I am trying to decide between the two. Thanks. Well, Brian, Great question, first of all. I love comparisons, and KEF R3 is a speaker that I find, unless you pair it up with the Hagel integrated amplifiers, unless you do that, I find the sound to be rather disconnected from the woofer to the tweeter. And I know it's a dual concentric design for the tweeter and mid-range, but for a speaker that has a dual concentric design, I don't find it that it's seamless. And I find that the KEF LS50 Meta is actually a better speaker when you're looking for coherency instead of the R3. R3 is impressive because it has bass authority, but again, I would find that the Paradigms are a superior speaker in the sense of detail retrieval, in terms of nuance, in terms of just overall performance-wise. I would prefer the Paradigm myself. However, the bass, definitely R3 has more of it, it's a bigger speaker. Moving on, Christopher Barrett. I saw your name before. You ask really good questions. Those are sexy as hell. Agreed. Curious as to how they compare with the Buchard S400 Mark II, or are they out of different price ranges? Man, I love this guy. This guy asks great questions. I was wondering who would ask for the Buchard S400 Mark II, and you were it. And there were a few others, but you asked it more concisely. Anyways, Buchard S400 Mark II is a speaker that is around $2,500 US, and the Paradigms are about $2,000 US, right? There's a $500 difference. Now, if I had to pick for myself, I would still pick the Buchard S400 Mark II because it has a lower extension, more refined highs, more smoother highs. Just overall preference, I prefer the Mark II, Buchard S400 Mark II for my personal listening experience. But when it comes to detail retrieval, that effect of imaging, Buchard S400 Mark II does not do that. So if you're someone that is looking for that kind of experience that I explained in this video, then like I said, there is no, it's like oranges to apples. Like what is more important to you? Is that imaging capability of the Paradigm more important to you, or is the overall smoothness and stuff like that more towards your taste, like myself? And you just gotta pick the one that is the most important to you, that gives you the most characteristic that you are looking for. Now, next question is by M_C_. Is the Soundstage better than others at its price point? Yes, that is exactly what the speaker is about. Now, I wouldn't say so much as to being a soundstage thing as much as it is about imaging thing. So meaning, yes, the soundstage is abnormally great on the speaker compared to other bookshelf speakers, but it's not so much that it's wide and deep in terms of its soundstage characteristic, but it's more so that you can pick out things in the soundstage more easily. So imaging, side imaging, center imaging, and stuff like that within the soundstage is what's impressive about the speaker, and is definitely better than others in this price range for that. Next, Joseph Trin, sorry. Please compare it to the CSS Audio 1TDX. Thanks a lot. I love the 1TDX, but this Paradigm looks so sexy. Now, the CSS Audio 1TDX is about $2,500 when you have a finished pair, or $2,400. It's a DIY kit. So again, that brings out tremendous value for a DIY kit. I think it performs at a different league than the Paradigms. The bass is deeper, it has attributes that the Paradigms just don't do. However, again, the Paradigms do things even the CSS Audio 1TDX dare not to do, and that is the phase coherency. Even though it's a two-way speaker, it acts like almost a dual concentric design or a tannoy speaker, where it's imaging to the side and all that stuff that I just explained. So again, it's a trade-off. Like, if your value is, if you want that imaging capability and that's what's important to you the most, then it doesn't matter if I have a CSS Audio 1TDX in front of you. You would still pick the Paradigm. So it's what is important to you. But if you're looking for an overall superior speaker, I would still prefer and say that the CSS Audio 1TDX is a superior speaker overall. Next is by Ray Juarez. How would this work for home theater is an intriguing question. I agree, it is an intriguing question. I'm looking for a speaker that looks stunning and works for music and theater. I would say Paradigm. Like, this speaker is as good as some of the KEF LS50 Meta speakers, like that kind of dual concentric tannoy design. In terms of phase coherency, it does great things with imaging. It's, like I said, great with dialogue, and you're adding a subwoofer in a home theater setting anyways. It's perfect for home theater, and if you want to jam out to music and it's the sound that's up your alley, it will do intriguing things for you in that system. So yeah, I would say I would definitely recommend this. High recommendation for home theater and music with these speakers. Next, Juan Lega. I'd like to know how they compare to the KEF LS50 Metas. Now this is an interesting one. I'm thankful that you asked. Now the KEF LS50 Metas I'm very familiar with. I have it on my desktop all the time. And this speaker is a great speaker. It's phase coherent, and that's why I'm using it on my desk with big TV in between, and it still gives me imaging down the center. Now this speaker, I did the same thing on my desk, not really for a desktop setup, but I tried it, and surely enough, the high frequency is too bright for a closed field like that. So I really wouldn't use it on a desk, but for stereo setting, which was probably your question, I would say that the Paradigm still do those imaging things better than the KEF LS50 Metas. The KEF LS50 Metas seems to be slightly more phase coherent. Like both speakers are way more phase coherent. I would say the KEF does have a more richer mid-bass presence, but I would say the Paradigms have a more detailed retrieval, more of the nuances popping out at you with imaging capability. So it's a trade-off. Which one is more important to you? Again, it all comes down to that. But anyways, that's pretty much it for all the questions. Thank you for watching, and keep them coming. See you on the next one. Peace.